Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. Today we are privileged to have for our guest speaker a knowledgeable and authoritative historian, a successful and popular teacher, a diligent researcher and explorer whose exploits have earned him the respect and admiration of many professionals in the field of archaeological study, whose humanitarian efforts have earned him the undying gratitude of the many people who have benefited from his work. But most of all, he has proved his superior and profound wisdom by choosing me as his only sister. Ladies and gentlemen, my favorite aviation archaeologist, Mr. G. Pat Maka.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it very much. I have a new program with a new book, Historic Aircraft Wrecks of Los Angeles County. People say, how did you get into this? And it happened because I grew up in the Centinela Valley. I went to Lenox High School. I had the good fortune to be hired by the Centinela Valley YMCA in 1961 to work at their mountain camp at Barton Flats on Highway 38. And my job was hike master. So one thing I had to do was climb Mount San Gorgonio, the highest peak in Southern California, once a week, every week, and do an overnight with kids. And I got sick and tired of going the same old way, and I decided on this one hike, we're going to do something different. We're going to go up the old way through Dollar Lake, out of Poop Out Hill, and then we're going to go overland down to Dry Lake Camp. And in doing that, I stumbled into the first airplane wreck I had ever seen. Everyone in that group was silent because as we entered the crash scene, we saw personal effects, uniforms, parachutes, and immediately, in my mind, when did this happen? How did it happen? Who was involved? And as we moved down through the debris field, you can see the big yellow X on the wing. That indicates the wreck's been found. You don't have to report it. And that was on another trip. That's at Mine Shaft Flat. So I was a lot lighter in those days. I think about 158 pounds. And that's an aileron from that C-47. When we got back, I went down to the old ranger at Barton Flats and I said, what do you know about this? He said, well, it happened in 1952, December 1st. The airplane was coming out of Arizona trying to reach Marchfield. There were 13 men on board. The pilot knew the weather was terrible, but he thought he could get through because of the VOR at March. There was no VOR at Palm Springs at that time. But unfortunately, he got off the track and apparently in the last moments realized he was headed into the high country. He was climbing as fast as he could when he collided with the mountain. And that's the airplane, the venerable C-47. And this is the pilot. For every name, there is a face. This is George Bingham, and I've been in touch with his family. And that's what the crash scene looked like in May of 1953 when they could finally get in there on foot, and look how deep the snow was then. Well, in the investigation on this, they found out that 3 men had survived the crash. 2 Air Force men were found huddled together in the back of the airplane. They had sustained multiple broken bones and serious injuries. But a quarter mile below the crash site was a young Marine, 19 years old, who had sustained no injuries whatsoever. He was found frozen, clutching his greatcoat, and his arm was raised as if to wave at the search aircraft that were going by. Of course, that wouldn't happen today. You might say, was there any effort to get in there once they spotted the wreck? Yes, there was. 4 days after the crash, an HRS-2 helicopter from the Marine Corps managed to get up there and drop off 2 Air Force personnel. The weather was terrible. The winds were gusting 40 knots when the drop-off was made. Within 30 minutes, the Air Force people radioed, "We got frostbite, get us out of there." And you might say, why didn't an Air Force helicopter go there? Because the Air Force didn't have an H-19B available, which is the Marine HRS-2 with the bigger engine. So this guy comes in to pick up the two Air Force folks, and he settles and crash lands. Now you've got a helicopter there, you've got a Marine and two Air Force personnel. The weather is deteriorating, and at that moment, there's only one other alternative to get them off the mountain alive. A Marine captain volunteers to fly out of 29 Palms Base in the only other HRS-2 in the area. He lands successfully, picks up all three men, and makes an escape down Whitewater Canyon. The winds at that time were gusting an incredible 65 knots. So in May of '53, they get in, the bodies are taken out, the wreck is painted a yellow X, and an entrepreneur shows up from Los Angeles. He hires the football team at Redlands High School. They disassemble the HRS-2 that force landed up there, pack it down to Poop Out Hill, and they ship it back to Long Beach Airport. And when they get to Long Beach Airport, this guy is going to then put it on the auction block and sell it because it's in really good shape. But he has a surprise waiting for him, representatives of the United States Navy that say, "Thank you very much for returning our property to us." And they took possession at that time. So from this one wreck, I began looking for aircraft crash sites throughout California. And the ranger helped me get started, because if you're interested, Pat, in airplanes, there's an old Stearman in the Meadows over there that two Army guys cracked up and hiked out of. There's an SNJ on that ridge that two Navy guys survived and got out of. There's a B-25 on the south side, and I was on my way. When the camp director said, "Where are you going, Pat, for the overnight?" I said, "Into the backcountry." And he didn't care where we went, but we were searching for aircraft, and that's where I began building the database that has led to today. That was 52 years ago, and it's gone by in a blink. You can see the impact point on the C-47, and this photo's taken from Highway 38, and when the sun hits it in the summer, that wreckage shines like a diamond. A memorial marker is right there at the crash site. Wonderful tribute to the 13 men who lost their lives while in good service to our nation. So let's go to Los Angeles County, and we'll go back to the early days flying into the storm. So many of the accidents were weather related, and people had to find out the hard way with the limited instrumentation available that flying into the clouds, not just storms, but fog, stratus, you name it, can lead to difficulty. At one time, we had a huge amount of airfields here in the LA area. 37 of them have gone away, no longer around. And Cloverfield, thank God, Santa Monica is the oldest continuously operating airport in Los Angeles County. So here's a Curtiss F-5L, and this is over at Catalina Island. This is a Navy flying boat, had a big crew on it, and it was fogged in. And this guy was trying to get into land and get into Avalon Harbor, but he didn't quite make it. And incredibly on this, although there were 5 critical injuries, there were 3 fatalities, and 1 man survived this accident without any serious injury at all. Pacific Air Transport, and this was news to me in studying the mail planes of the day. This is 1931, flying a Boeing Model 40 biplane that could carry mail and passengers, a good airplane for its time, and they lost quite a few of them here in California. The mail had to get through. If the pilot survived the crash of a mail plane, no matter what, he was to stay with the wreckage and defend the mail until rescued. He was not to leave the airplane under any circumstances. So 2 guys, Parmalee and Starbuck, were trying to get into Burbank because that was the airport in LA County at that time. The Verdugo Mountains and the San Gabriel Mountains are located nearby. And unfortunately, they missed the field and ran into the mountains right there, killing both of them. In '34, George K. Rice was flying a Northrop Alpha male plane, and he got into the clouds, but he saw the top of the ridge in the nick of time and made a crash landing in the Santa Susana Mountains. He stayed, although badly injured, he stayed with the wreck until he was spotted by search planes and a ground party got in. He had on that airplane about $385,000 worth of negotiable certificates and other, including cash, forms of money. I had no idea they were flying that kind of stuff around at that time. George K. Rice survived, recovered, and became a well-known, famous TWA aviator. Somebody wanted to fly up and see George's crash site. They left Whiteman, or San Fernando Airport, in a Waco Model C, 4 of them, and they went up. As they got out of the airport, it was fine, but in the pass there were clouds. And the minute he got into the clouds, he was lost, and he hit the head wall where the water comes over the plume, to bring the water out of the Inyo County area to the reservoir. Now, United Airlines was one of the first to get the Boeing 247 into operation, and within just a couple of months, they had 2 losses, or 1 loss with the 247 in California. And the first one in 1936 in December, and that's the 247, the really first modern, all-metal, monoplane, retractable gear airliner. This particular airplane was trying to reach Burbank. They were coming from Sacramento, San Francisco, and they flew into Rice Canyon in the fog and clouds. And you can see the end result. The airplane did not burn. Quite a bit was made of this loss because this airplane also had valuables on board, and there was a diamond broker who usually carried diamonds with him in a vest on his clothing. No diamonds were recovered. But it did give rise to another story later in True Magazine called the Diamond DC-3, based on this 247 loss. And then we get to the loss of the Boeing 247 on Pinedos Peak in January of '37. This airplane, in this particular case, the pilot through the clouds saw the mountain coming in the last moments, and he made a successful controlled crash landing. There were survivors on this. Some people were seriously injured. One man that was not hiked all the way down to get help. He went to the hospital in San Fernando and alerted the authorities. On board this airplane was Martin Johnson, the famous African explorer, and his wife Osa Johnson. She survived, but he did not. If you go to this site today, there's still micro debris there, but it was recovered for its aluminum value. Many of these wrecks that were left on the mountains were eventually recovered by one man who worked out of Rosamond, California, and he smelted. He would take burros in, he would smelt on site all of the aluminum and reduce it. He would leave the engines, the landing gear, all the heavy metal that was of no value to him. And he's long gone now, but Jim Kofel, somebody I talked to back in the day, boy, he reduced a lot of historic aircraft, including 3 F-4F Wildcats down in San Diego County. If he hadn't done that, think what we might have in museums. But in those days, nobody was even thinking in terms of historic value. In 1938, there was the loss of a Lockheed Super Electra, a Model 14H. Northwest Airlines had purchased this airplane because of its speed. It was the fastest. Didn't carry that many people, so the inaugural delivery flight from Lockheed Burbank to go back east included people from the company, including 2 children. The normal route was to leave Burbank, go through the pass there, and then proceed east following what is today Highway 14. In a sense, it was IFR flying, I follow roads. But But the weather was not good, and this airplane went missing. It took a while to find it. In fact, it was found by a guy rounding up livestock. And that's what that airplane, the Super Electra, looked like. Howard Hughes owned one of those. And that's the crash scene there on Sierra Pelona Ridge. Sierra Pelona Ridge has 19 different aircraft types, including a P-38, a Waco, a Howard, a PV-1. And this is Sewell Griggers, Captain Sewell Griggers of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He is the founder of the Sheriff's Aero Detail. He started in the late 30s and he retired in 1962. He was a very nice man, took me under his wing after his retirement. I spent time with him in 68, 69. That's his crash map. He had a crash log. He knew every wreck in Los Angeles County. He said, "Pat, here's where you need to go. Here's a good site. Here's the story on this one." And I paid close attention. He retired out to Hemet, California, died a number of years ago. My son kept up with him and would visit him and his brother Lyndall Griggers. Sewell was the first man to land a helicopter on top Mount Baldy. He did it in a Bell 47. Number one, he never married, he didn't smoke, he didn't chew, didn't drink, didn't go with girls who do. And what a guy. Very disciplined, I'll tell you. So we get to World War II, winds of war and the wings of war. I deal really with accidents only in open space, in the ocean out there, in the hill country, areas not developed on. So this is a North American T-6 Texan. There's no weather issue on this. They're flying out of LA and they're having fun, and they're buzzing the mountaintops near Mount Wilson. Only he hits a tree right at the top of a ridge, and that took care of both of them. This is at the top of Rubio Canyon. This wreck was never really salvaged, but it was covered over time by runoff after fires and the deluges we had in the past. Here's a P-38. People say, how many P-38s went down in LA County? Well, I've got data on 41, not all in open space. This particular airplane on Catalina Island, we spent quite a bit of time on 2 years ago and finally found the crash site. And this airplane was in a flight of 4. They were doing air defense patrol flights, and he had an engine go out. So he told his leader that he was going to try to land at the Catalina airport. And that's before they put the big barricades in. During the war, they shut the airfield down so you couldn't land on it. But he tried to do that. He slowed the airplane down. He was going to go into a turn, and you know, when you get too slow and you're too heavy, he literally fell out of the sky. So the airplane did not burn. It appears intact. You'd have thought it was survivable, but it wasn't because of the G-loads. And Lieutenant Walter Lichtenberger was killed, regrettably. One of my favorite stories involves a Douglas C-53 towing a Waco CG-4A glider. Now, the C-53 is a military version of the DC-3, but it's really for use by paratroopers. The C-47 had the big cargo door and the C-53 didn't. So at Van Nuys Airport in 1943, on this date in January, you have a pilot who's antsy to get back to Victorville, where he's based. He's got to tow the glider there. He's been there about 3 days because of high winds and bad weather. And finally, he says on this morning, in late January, we're going for it. So off they go, towing the CG-4A. Our dad served in the CG-4A in the 82nd Airborne Division and the 13th Airborne Division, 88th Glider Infantry Regiment. So the CG-4A has a special place in my heart. I was interested in finding the crash site of this airplane. What happened was, as he got up over Santa Clarita in terrible, terrible turbulence, He realized he couldn't get out to the desert, so he was going to do a turnaround to come back to Van Nuys, but something catastrophic happened. The stress loads pulled the tail off of the C-53. Now the three men in the front, pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer, plunged to their deaths. The glider pilot detached instantaneously and realized he wasn't going to make it, so he and his co-pilot bailed out successfully. But there were three men in the back of the C-53, and they were thrown out into space, into clear air. They had parachutes on. They all pulled their D-rings, but they're over the mountains, so the parachutes had barely opened when they hit the ground. One man is supercritical. The second man is critical. The third man is serious. But they're in a remote location. Who's going to help them? Well, help came from the Winkler family that lived about 5 miles away. Mr. Winkler got his daughter, who was about 10 at the time. They could see the parachutes coming down, and they started hiking. After hours, they found the men on the ground, the chutes. The dad took 2 of the parachutes and made a big X in this open space. He told his daughter, "You take care of these men, cover them with this other parachute, and attend to whatever you can do." They had some water, no food. The dad hiked on to see if there were any survivors at main impact. He could see where the smoke was coming from that, but there were none. Now, while the dad was gone, an Army plane circled the X on the ground several times, waggled its wings, and then flew away. That evening, a rescue team arrived overland with horses and mules, and they packed the 3 injured men out. One of them subsequently died later. But Stuart Nengel, who was critically injured, managed to survive. And when he told me the story of how that girl stayed with him and comforted him and encouraged them to live, that had real impact. We had to find that girl, and we did. Stuart Nengel just passed away 3 weeks ago. He was a private first class. At that time, it took 6 months to recover from his injuries. He remained in the service until the end of the war, and he was a sergeant at the time that he was discharged. That's a shot of the crash site of the C-53. There's the Waco CG-4A. These are from the Air Force accident reports. And my son, myself, and others went in on behalf of the next of kin to locate this site, because the daughter of Stuart Nengel and the granddaughter wanted to visit the crash site. This is all part of Project Remembrance. Bruce Guberman was there as well. Some of the aileron assembly from the aircraft, rudder assembly. And on the right there is Mary Lynn Winkler Butters, and on the left is her sister Barbara, who died just a couple of years ago. So Mary Lynn was proclaimed a heroine. Hap Arnold wrote her a letter commending her. She appeared on a radio program with Gene Autry, and there she is with Gene Autry. She's on the right side. She was in a magazine called Calling All Girls. She's a very humble lady. She lives in the same house, same area where she lived when she was a kid when all this happened. She said, "Pat, I didn't do anything. I did nothing extraordinary. I just did what my dad asked me to do." How heartening that is these days. So here's the family at the crash site. We have Mary Lynn on the right. The lady that's blind is the daughter, and the granddaughter next to her, and then the property owner. It's a big ranch up there. Mary Lynn was able to contact Francine Rippey, and Francine said, "We don't usually let people in on our property. You got to have 4-wheel drive. We run cattle out there, and we got mountain lions there too." But she let us in, and we had a good outcome on that. Stuart couldn't be there because of failing health, but he was certainly there in spirit. Another loss during the war, and a sad one too, Here's where weather again is a factor. A C-46 coming from Arizona is trying to get to Long Beach Army Air Base, and he's lost. I mean, very lost. He's over the Mojave Desert north of Wrightwood, and in those clouds, he cannot see the San Gabriel Mountains. So he's heading south towards Long Beach. He sees the mountains, he pulls up, and in pulling up, the airplane did what that Air France flight over the Atlantic did. He gets so steep, he slides back tail first. He hits the mountain, the tail and empennage is lanced on the tree that you see there. The fuselage breaks off and goes down the canyon and killed all 4 men on that. Sewell Griggers gave me that original photo, and he said, "Pat, you go up there and see what it looks like today." Well, that's what it looks like today, except that it's now broken off on the trees died and it's gone over. See the X's on that side? Let's go to the other side where the sun don't shine. The paint is still there. It still looks good. That's what it looks like from George Peterson's Super Cub. I took that photo not too many years ago, just before George had to retire from flying. He's an NTSB investigator, retired. The PV-1 is an airplane my dad worked on at Lockheed before he was called up in the Second World War. It was built by the Vega Division for the Navy and Marines, and they had to do test flights with these aircraft. So this PV-1 goes on a flight from Burbank out to Palmdale, but again following the 14 freeway, and there's clouds and the weather's not so good, clear on the desert, but it's socked in. George Dory, flying this airplane, hits a ridge 10 feet below. It's the last ridge before you go over the desert into Palmdale. And at this particular site is still up there. His wife went up during the war and placed a memorial marker that said, "Goodbye to my guy," and her name. We lost almost 30,000 airmen and women during the Second World War in routine training, testing, and ferrying of aircraft. And another one that went down in the San Gabriel Mountains. There's plenty of BT-13s in LA County. This airplane was flown by Flight Officer Ray Schwartz, and he took a buddy with him out of Victorville Army Airfield, and on this just regular old routine training flight, he decided to fly over Wrightwood, the town of. He flew west from Wrightwood up a long valley, and that valley ends with some fairly high terrain. And the BT could not make it, didn't have the power, and he collided with that terrain. Both he and his passenger were killed. When some people are unlucky, there are other people who are incredibly lucky. 2 Army Air Force pilots in a Cessna UC-78, a Bamboo bomber. They got lost in the clouds trying to fly from the LA area over to Palmdale, and miraculously crash landed up at about the 7,500 foot level. They suffered bumps and bruises. There's no fire, thankfully. They hiked up to Highway 2. They could see the roadway. They waited until the morning to go on down, where they flagged down a car and they were driven to the hospital. So this airplane I've looked for, but not successfully. It's a fabric-covered aircraft, and hard to see after the fabric deteriorates. We believe it's still there, although there was a rumor somebody took the 2 old Jacobs engines out years ago. So somewhere there below Highway 2, in some tough country with lots of manzanita, remains this old UC-78 like Sky King used to fly, one of my favorite childhood programs. Catalina caught not only P-38s and F-4Us and other aircraft, but a Goodyear airship, the K-111. The K-111 launched from the airship base in Tustin at night to fly out to the east end of Catalina and then fly all the way to Scammons Lagoon in Baja and then back to the base there in Tustin. And this was an anti-submarine warfare patrol flight. Now the crew knew that the island was there, In fact, one of the officers said, "Sir, we're not high enough to clear the island should we be too far north." And the officer in command said, "Don't worry about it. I've got it. Everything's okay." And they collided with the ridge there east of Avalon, with fatal results for some, but not all of the crew. Several of the men were badly burned. The pilot, the captain himself, was killed. And that's a big airship. If you go to the island today down in that canyon, the gondola is still there, as are the engines. Locals have taken out certain artifacts, including the .50 caliber gun and propellers and things like that. I know the Navy has sniffed on that a little bit, but people are keeping a tight lip, and I don't know who the people are exactly. Another wartime loss that involved a civilian airliner, American Airlines, had service from El Paso to Burbank with a stop in Arizona. And the movie actress Donna Reed, she took that flight east. She went out to El Paso. She went down to Mexico at Juarez, and she got a quickie divorce. And she came back to get on the airplane, and she got on it, and then she was asked to get off the airplane because a high-ranking military officer wanted her seat. And in those days, the protocol was the military always came first. So she gave up her seat. She had to catch a later flight. Well, as this flight came back into Burbank Airport, again, socked in, heavy clouds, the pilot got into that overcast, did not follow the directive of the control tower, and went right over the airport eastbound into the Verdugo Mountains. So that's a shot of that airplane, a fine aircraft, the DC-3, and that's the crash scene shortly after, with war bonds on the tail. So fate sometimes plays a role in these things. An interesting midair that happened, and we've been to this, two of our first jet fighters, the Bell P-59A era Comets, mid-aired during formation low-altitude simulated runs to let anti-aircraft gunners see if they could track on jets. And this is just near Gray Butte Army Airfield out there. They mid-aired at 500 feet, no ejection seats in those days, and both men were sadly killed. And that's what our P-59 looks like. There's quite a bit of debris from both those airplanes still out there. So Catalina, again, the war is about to end, but the Marines are ramped up their training. Navy and Marine flyers are practicing dogfights, and occasionally when that happens, mid-airs occur. Happy endings on both of these. One airplane spun into the ocean. The pilot got out. He landed on the edge of a cliff. He was hanging on his parachute and was rescued happily. The guy in this airplane, spinning upside down, managed to get out somehow, opened his chute, landed real hard, got banged up good. Now, sadly, this is an airplane you could have restored, but they went out there with a heavy lift helicopter, picked it up, and dumped it in the ocean. Again, that's before they realized the value of warbirds. And one of the last losses during the war, a C-46 hit up at Mount Baldy. It had a woman nurse on board. It was at midnight, Ontario Army Air Base, headed north up to Sacramento. Clipped the very top of the mountain, went over the north side. You can see this today from Highway 2. The prop, that's way down on the north side of the mountain there, and there's a lot, that whole airplane is there. And the very last military loss for us in LA County during the war was a Marine TBM-3 that was carrying guys out to the Mojave base from El Toro. And once again, he's on the Highway 14 flightway. And once again, it's Sierra Pelona Ridge, and the ridges around it catches another airplane. It's clear on the desert, but socked in over the mountains. The sky's the limit. After World War II, everything gets going, great guns. Light planes everywhere. I love looking at the photos of airports where they're packed with light aircraft because they're cheap, inexpensive, and anybody can own one. This is a military loss in '47, right at the time we transitioned from the Army Air Force to the U.S. Air Force. And that's Lieutenant Bickford. His daughter asked me if we could find that crash site, if she could have the report, what was there. She didn't want to go there, but she wanted to know what the heck happened to her dad. That's myself at the site maybe 20 years ago. and unburned, he crashed into Grand Canyon. Here's an A-26 in the Verdugo Mountains. When the war ended, you could buy almost any military airplane surplus for not a lot of money, but the A-26 was still a sensitive operational aircraft. Nonetheless, one was sold to an individual who was going to use it for aerial surveys and photography. He takes off with his wife and his mechanic from Burbank, and it's just the May-June gloom. It's not even, it's no storm, but it's socked in the Stratus, and what happens? He hits the Verdugos, and there's that A-26. A good story involving a Northrop P-61, and this involves our good friend Roy Wolford, who is now dearly departed. He was the cameraman on this flight, and his mission, sitting behind the pilot, and that pilot was A.J. Slim Perrette, who didn't believe in wearing parachutes. He said they're only good for seat cushions. Well, Roy had his on, and the guy in the back who was a cameraman, he had his on. They're taking photos of the YB-49. They're in formation, but they also have another airplane. There's a P-80 Shooting Star right with them as well. And the P-80 pilot says, hey, you're on fire. You got your starboard engines on fire. Get out of that airplane. And Roy said initially, we didn't see anything. He looked back, and there's flames coming over the wing. So the guy in the back panics. He kicks the panel out, and as he bails out, he bangs himself up good. So Roy's getting ready to bail, and he says, come on, Slim, we got to get out of here. And Slim says, I don't have my chute on. So Roy stays in the airplane, helps A.J. Slim Perrette get that chute on, but he can't quite get everything just right. Now here's the problem. Bailing out of a P-61 is not easy, and most guys who tried it didn't survive. Roy actually rolled out across the wing, went through the flames, rolled outside the boom, pulled the D-ring. Great. Perrette stood up in the cockpit just as the airplane broke in two and catapulted him out. He pulled the D-ring, he made it. The airplane spun in a flat spin onto the Mojave. There's still debris out there from it. There you see the nose gear, it's upside down. And there's Roy when we brought back some pieces for him, and that's with a model of the 61, and he recounted that story. What a great story. And he was a legend at Northrop Aircraft, all the photo work that he did. Somebody else that was lucky, and by the way, Slim Perrette died not long after that, flight testing the Northrop Pioneer. This is an old Norden Norseman, and you could get those surplus. They were built in Canada. They were called the UC-64, a good transport, rugged, dependable, fabric covered. Two guys buy it, that's surplus. They're going to fly it up north, but they're leaving the LA basin when the weather's not good. And the next thing you know, there's the San Gabriel Mountains, and there's a wall, and they throttle back, drop the flaps, and they crash land it. So I've been up there a few times. Cindy was actually up there as a kid in the 60s, and my brother-in-law's. That's an aileron from that Norden Norseman. It's still sitting up there in the saucer branch above Altadena. Those guys had no injuries. They hiked out on their own. Here's a Sikorsky S-43 at Catalina Island, Avalon Air Transport, the early service over there, and I finally got the true story on this. The pilot was supposed to fly this airplane back to Long Beach at 6 a.m. and pick up passengers. But he decided to go back at 3 a.m. after spending all night in the Marlin Bar over there, drunker than a skunk he gets in, and away he goes. And for reasons known only to himself, he flies back into the island. But this is the really unbelievable part. He survived in critical condition. I don't see how that's possible, but it did happen. The wreck was then pulled off the rocks and sunk offshore. Here's a Navy R4D that went down trying to fly from Long Beach to Santa Monica Airport. Again, in the low clouds, May-June gloom, only 500, 600 feet above the roadways, he flew into the Santa Monica Mountains with catastrophic result. A C-46F in 49. Well, you know, in the late 40s, early 50s, they had these non-scheduled airlines. You could start your own airline. If you traveled non-sched, you could save money. They kept the airplanes looking nice, and they mostly used C-46s because they could carry a pretty good passenger load. That's a C-46F, a New Standard Airways. And so this airplane is trying to get into Burbank Airport. Again, we're talking pea soup city, and they fly into the mountains near Chatsworth. Incredibly, there were survivors on this aircraft. More than a dozen people lived, all in the tail section. Quite a bit of that airplane is still up there. Debris and all the pottery and all the service stuff that they had in those days, you know, the glass plates, etc. This is Verdugo's again. Jackie Cochran owned a Lodestar. She wasn't in it, but she was chartering it out to people, and they were doing the same thing. They were trying to get into Burbank, waiting for it to clear up just enough, and they got in too close, and they hit there at Chatsworth, near just Rocky Point near Chatsworth Peak, and killed the 3 folks on that. Sometimes we need to listen to our intuition. And this is a Howard DGA, darn good airplane, used by the Navy as an instrument trainer in World War II, a fine aircraft, favored by skydivers after the war. And they're real collectible birds today. Well, a young lady who had been recently divorced, she had a child, was invited to fly to Las Vegas with friends and a blind date. And she had a premonition. She told her neighbors, she said, I had a bad dream that I was going to be killed in a plane crash, and the color of the plane. And I know that this is, no way could this happen, but in case anything does, here's my will and testament. Would you take my daughter? And the neighbor said, yes, I'll see that everything is taken care of. So off they go. Again, they're following Highway 14, sound familiar, Sierra Pelona Ridge. They crash. This airplane was missing for a while until found. There's what's left of it. It's been burned over, the fabric's gone. Didn't burn at the time. All 4 people were killed. Listen to our inner voice sometimes, huh? A Civil Air Patrol plane doing a practice mission to look at a B-24 wreck on Mount Gleason and a BT-13 that had gone down looking at the B-24, but the guys in the 13 survived. So they're circling that when they crash, and they're both killed. So you have 3 airplanes next to each other, 2 of which were brought down by the first, indirectly. The midair of the F-89D and the Douglas DC-6B over Pacoima was a terrible air disaster. 70 people on the ground were injured. 3 were killed and 5 were killed, 4 in the DC-6B and the pilot of the F-89. The only survivor was the back seater, who managed to punch out in the nick of time. That would not happen today with the air traffic control protocols that we have in place and the technology that's available to us. That's the crash scene of the F-89. There's still considerable wreckage up there. The flight test crew out of Santa Monica often took their parachutes. On that day, they did not. And it was heard over the radio, I told you we should have brought the chutes. Had they had a chance of getting out. F-86L test flight out of LA North American Division. Bill Yoakley's the test pilot, somebody my dad knew. And he was a great guy. He's still around, I think. And this is an F-86D Sabre Dog, modified, upgraded. So Bill Yoakley gets out over the Catalina Channel. He's got an engine problem, total flame out, can't restart. Mayday, mayday, he punches out. He's instantly picked up by boats in the channel, but his airplane keeps going, circles around Avalon and crashes west of Avalon. And that airplane is still there. Came down pretty good, recognizable for a jet. Firefighting can be risky. Aerial firefighting can be much riskier, and we have 2 of those losses in the San Bernardino or San Gabriel Mountains. The first in 1960 was a converted B-25 bomber that flew up a canyon, totally obscured by smoke, and crashed, killing the 2-man crew. And that's my son with the tail feathers of that airplane. That was a war surplus bird. And then in 60, they lost a TBM Avenger right above Altadena. Again, smoke obscuring the drop target. Milo Peltzer gave me that photo of the airplane before the loss. And then there's the tail, wheel, and empennage. That airplane is up there, never been touched. C-47s, many of those were lost in our local mountains. And one of the most remarkable losses was in the Santa Susana Pass area, where in the fog, hit the mountain, but while the flight crew was killed, 3 people in the back survived and hiked 5 miles to get help at the Nike base there. And one of the most remarkable stories is the Convair 340 that went down coming from San Francisco all the way down the valley. And I talked to old Rudy Lofton. Some of you may know Rudy. He flew for United for years, and he did that. It was either San Francisco or Sacramento you'd land. You'd do the hopscotch up and down Fresno, Bakersfield, LA. So these folks depart. Everything is good. Pilot and co-pilot, very skilled. They have 40-some people on board, 44 passengers. And among the passengers is Mr. Matich, who is the founder of the Matich Corporation, who did the runways at Marchfield. He's done many freeways. He's passed on now, but I interviewed his son, and his son said, my dad and mom were on that flight, and when the airplane came up over the top of the pass at Gorman-Lebec, both engines quit. And all they could do, he said, was they held on to each other and said, please God, make it quick for us. But the pilot remembered that there was an abandoned emergency strip near where Magic Mountain is today. It was to be used by airliners in the 20s, 30s, into the late 40s in emergency situations. So with the props feathered and keeping the nose down and the airspeed up, they successfully landed on that strip. One person complained of a slight sprain in leaving the aircraft. There were no injuries. It was a miracle. Both pilots were called on the carpet. They were going to be dismissed for not following the protocol outlined in the manual provided by the airline, and they said, excuse us, but we did exactly what you had printed here regarding fuel transfer, and your booklet is in error. They were both reinstated, went on to long careers. The book was modified. The airplane was jacked up, engines replaced, and it was flown off that strip back to LAX. Here's a C-119 in 1966, 4 Air Force reservists trying to get back to Marchfield. They had been up across the Mojave Desert. It's at night, it's not good weather, the C-119 flying boxcar. They run into the very top of Pallet Mountain, the same mountain with that C-46 on it. So people live down in the valley say, oh, there's an airplane up on the mountain. There's 2 airplanes up there. Because when the sun hits it, it shines. Tragic loss of 4 reservists. Highly visible. That's from George Peterson's Super Cub. Light plane wrecks, we don't have time for them. The hundreds of them that are up in those mountains. And 99% of them are all weather related. I'm in a hurry. I just got my pilot's license. We're going to Vegas, and story after story. That's a Cessna 172 that killed a fella, missing for a while, and then there's a fire that burned over that later. This looks survivable, but was not. A single individual, again, weathered the issue near Mount Baldy. And here's a Schweitzer glider with my son sitting in it, a Schweitzer 232 sailplane, and both people survived in this accident west of Wrightwood. Here's another lucky man flying up a canyon right below Highway 2. He hits the trees in a 150. He's badly injured. 3 days later, a motorist stops, hikes down the side, finds him laying there. Help me, help me. His life was saved. He gave up flying, but what a miracle that was. Just short of Vincent's Gap. He thought he could get through the gap. Never fly uphill, especially in a 150, right? Tanker 82, this is C-130A, lost in 1994, flying over the San Gabriels. This was not on a firefighting mission. This is an early C-130, that had the wing fail. George Peterson did this investigation and one other C-130A, and he put two and two together. Corrosion in the wing box that you could not inspect led to catastrophic failure of the structure, costing the lives of 3 men in this case and 3 in the other C-130A. All C-130As were grounded immediately. That's more from that particular site. The missing, how they haunt us. Arthur Scarr disappeared flying the Northrop 3A from Mines Fields on a test flight. This airplane was to compete with the Seversky P-35 and the Curtiss P-36. Only one was built. This is the last photograph ever taken of him and his ride. He disappeared over Santa Monica Bay, presumably doing stall spin tests. Most of us here know about Gertrude Tommy Tompkins Silver. She is the only missing and unaccounted for women's Air Force service pilot from Second World War. Of the 38 WASP killed in action, she is the only one still missing. And there have been many searches launched on behalf of her family to learn the secret of where that 51 is located, but we have not been successful so far. She departed Mines Field, LAX, late on the afternoon of the 26th of October. Heavy clouds blanketed the coast. She was high-time pilot. She was a pilot before she joined the WASP, but she had a canopy locking problem, and apparently, we don't know. There was one eyewitness, a kid fishing, who saw the 51 climbing and then fall off on its left wing and go into the bay. And nobody listened to that kid at the time. He tried to tell people about it, and they said, shut up, kid, and go home. They already know about it at the field. That's the plaque that's over at the Flight Path Museum honoring her. We had a gathering a number of years ago that brought many of her sisters back to talk about the search effort. But this man has been the key individual on the Gertrude Tommy Tompkins search, and that's Gary Fabian. His website is ub88.org. I urge you to see that site, to take a look at the other aircraft that he has located, including a B-36 off of San Diego. He's been involved in trying to find a nuclear weapon off South Carolina. So Gary Fabian found the German submarine UB-88 off Long Beach. And that was a World War I sub that was towed over here to be used as a target. The Navy in the late 20s sent a boat out, a destroyer escort. The skipper was a guy named Halsey. One shot was fired, hit the sub, it sank. Fabian found it. He put an article in Diver magazine. The article had photos of the wreck, intact on the bottom, sitting right side up. The United States Navy called him and said, Mr. Fabian, if you told anybody where that sub is, you'll be prosecuted. If you took anything from that sub, that's our property, you'll be prosecuted. And by the way, where is it? And Mr. Fabian said, well, we never take anything, we didn't tell anyone, and we're not telling you. But he was key on this particular search effort. He has reported every other aircraft that he's ever found to the Navy, because there's an MIA issue there. So there's an old chart. That's her flight path leaving LA. And in the search for her, although unsuccessful, Gary said, I've got a target. In May of '09, he said, Pat, I'm putting divers in the water. And the diver came up and said, airplane. And so I got the call. He said, Patty is sitting down. The diver thinks it's a radial engine. They see cylinder heads. Or not a radial, but cylinder heads. So I thought Packard Merlin maybe, and the P-51, and then I got to see the photos. And the photos led us to a T-33 that had disappeared in 1955, flown by Lieutenant Tyler, and in the back seat was his best friend, Paul Dale Smith. They had come from Yuma, Arizona the previous day, and they were told to have dinner early, take off at 1 a.m. and go back to Yuma. They went out to the field, they got in the jet, they took off. LA was 00. It was going to be an instrument flight back. No word was heard from them. They did a wonderful ceremony there, full military honors. You're never more proud to be a citizen of the Republic other than at moments like these. And so the Smith family representative on the right side there, and the the Tyler family representative on the right side, and he was an Air Force pilot himself and was involved in the search for his brother. So it meant a great deal to him, closure. We had people volunteer their vessels to come out of Marina del Rey to take people out over the crash site. Proud to be an American. And the memorial is here at the museum for them. This plaque is here at the Western Museum of Flight. Another T-33 goes missing in '59. This is easier to find because they knew the flight path. This airplane had hit Mount Baldy, but the snows were so deep they couldn't do anything about it. But when the snow melted, then the wreck was located on the west flank of Mount Baldy. And somebody here in the audience asked me about the F-6F Hellcats. They're there also. They went down in '49, 2 Marine Hellcats in formation. And then the C-46 we talked about that hit the top of the mountain. So Chris LaFave flew over the site first. I got these photos from the air. You can see it. And then Chris and my son Pat went in. Chris is giving rides today. They hiked into this. And there's the ejection seat. It was a high-speed impact. There was no fire. The fuel vaporizes. And there's the wing, USAF on it. Still highly visible. LA didn't have that many long missing aircraft, but the disappearance of a Beechcraft Bonanza from Las Vegas to Van Nuys Airport with George Liberace's ex-wife on board did make the press. So there was a reward offered for this, finding this airplane, and it was pretty good money. And the search went and went and went. The pilot had a reputation in bad weather for coming in over Cajon Pass, flying over the LA basin, then doglegging into the San Fernando Valley. So the search was intense in that area. But one day in November of 1960, a ranger hiking down the Red Box Trail thought he saw a glimmer of metal through the undergrowth. He found the wreckage of the Bonanza. The case was closed, but controversy pursued because many thousands of dollars of her jewelry was never recovered. And people, really spent a lot of time at that site. So whether someone found it and didn't report it and took the monies, etc., we do not know. That'll be one of our little mysteries. But that closes this program. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.